Parker, great to see you.
Great to see both of you.
We're back. We're back with Parker, and we're going to go through the Gradually Then Suddenly book, chapter by chapter. And today we're going to do chapter one. And actually, this ties perfectly into Lauren's question because what's the title of chapter one, Lauren?
Bitcoin obsoletes all other money. And my question is, what does obsoletes mean? Or obsolete?
That's a great question. I was going to ask you, how many times have you read Bitcoin obsoletes all other money? Um, you know, you're always the one getting to ask questions, and here I am, never taking the opportunity to ask you one back. But I'll start by saying that I purposefully use the word obsolete as a verb, and it's not technically a verb. And a lot of people who are grammatical sticklers point that out, and I'm like, I know, but it should be a verb because it sounds better. Um, and so I took a little bit of liberty with the English language there. So if one were to use it grammatically correctly first, it would be something along the lines of Bitcoin will make all other money obsolete, rather than using obsolete as a verb. Don't want to get you in trouble in your homeschooling. But what it
This
basically
is
means,
homeschooling right here. Well done,
yes,
Professor
good.
Parker. Thank you.
Good. What it effectively means is that Bitcoin makes other money no longer useful because it is providing an advancement in technology that makes those other currencies not worth using anymore. So you could think about it like the car might have made horses as a means of travel obsolete. That a new technology comes along and renders a past technology no longer a utility. It doesn't mean it's not worth anything or not valuable at all, but for the purpose that it was intending to do. Similar from like the typewriter to the computer. The computer rendered the typewriter obsolete. It did the job of the typewriter far more efficiently and far better, so people could write a lot more on their computer a lot faster and correct things. Doesn't mean that typewriters don't still exist in the world. They just aren't used like computers are used. So obsolete generally means when one form of technology renders a pre-existing form of technology, or one good renders a previously used good for some certain task. Obsolete in the sense that it's no longer good at doing the job, or needed to do the job because something else is doing the job better.
So it just means it's doing it better, basically, right?
Yeah, and so applying it to Bitcoin is that everyone's walking around the world using bad forms of money, like the dollar, the euro, the pound, the yen, other currencies, and Bitcoin is a better form of money. And as people figure that out, it will make obsolete, or it will obsolete the use of those other forms of money, just like the computer obsoleted the typewriter, or the car obsoleted, at least for travel, in most places, the horse.
All right.
And Lauren, you're lucky enough to be part of this journey where you're early enough to see this. There are people walking around, like most of the world is walking around with like these fiat currencies in their pockets, who still, they might have heard of Bitcoin, but they're completely ignoring it. Think about how they're walking around with pointless money in their pocket. It's going to be obsoleted by this thing, and they have no idea.
Yeah.
That's why we do these
Oh, I
podcasts.
think the doorbell rang.
That is your French tutor for you actual homeschooling.
All right.
Yeah, and so in this chapter of the book, which your dad and I will discuss, is the reasons why Bitcoin will make obsolete all other forms of money, the properties in Bitcoin, but also the nature of how money works, and why it works and what it's designed to do, why money converges to one, and why Bitcoin's the best form of money, and that's why the entire world will shift over from using really bad forms of money to a much better form of money, being Bitcoin. So
Perfect.
listen to the episode, Lauren. It's gonna be
Yeah,
great.
you're gonna have to now. All right, see you later.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
See it.
All right, excellent, mate. Thank you for that. All right, so yeah, 1,000 possibilities, 999 problems is the subtitle of this chapter, and there's a diagram in there, figure 1.1, which is a great flow chart to for anybody to go through, and we might as well just go through it as we said when we were setting this up. And for those viewing, I'll try and hold it up. That's what it looks like. But I will. Well, it goes
What's
first
the
of all.
page number?
28.
Page 28 for those listening. When you buy the book, just go to page 28. And if you haven't bought the book, buy the book.
There you go. Is money a basic necessity, right? So this is a bottom-up approach. And actually, this is it's worth discussing this because most people come at Bitcoin, as you explained in the title, from a top-down approach, right? And especially those people in the world of venture capitalists or hedge funds like you used to be in, they get caught in this trap. So do you want to explain why it's necessary for people to come at this with a bottom-up approach rather than from a top-down approach?
Yeah, that's a great point to start at. And what I would say there is that there's a few things that logically happen to people when they start to evaluate Bitcoin. One, they'll generally think that it's far too complex to ever understand, and then they never endeavor to begin the journey because I would describe it as there's a fear of failure. They think, this is too complex. I'm never going to be able to understand it. Therefore, rather than attempt and fail, I'm not going to try. But part of what makes the dilemma of Bitcoin feel overwhelming to people is that if you are new to Bitcoin or on the periphery, and there are 1,000 cryptocurrencies that to you from the periphery all blend together and all are blurred together, and thinking, how am I possibly able to distinguish one from the other? And that if you started with the top down and just accepted there's 1,000 quote cryptocurrencies, there's 200 fiat currencies, but let's just focus on the quote cryptocurrencies. There's not enough time in the day if you wanted to go evaluate all 1,000 to read everything about Bitcoin, read everything about number 2, number 3, number 4, all the way to 1,000. You just get overwhelmed. And that is part of the snake oil salesman's pitch, is to associate these things. And if they can get you lost in trying to evaluate 1,000 different possibilities, recognizing that you're never going to be able to, just think about in any other application, try to compare 1,000 different what you perceive to be like things. As an example, like if there were 1,000 different types of grass and trying to distinguish small differences in species of grass, you'd never be able to do it unless you devoted your entire life to that. Most people don't have the time to do that. So the reality is that it's also the worst. Not only is it not possible to evaluate 1,000 things and then kind of keep them suspended in air to compare, if there's 1,000 things and 100 different things about each one, then you're looking at 100,000 different variables that you're having to compare against. So not only is it not possible, but it's also the worst approach you could take, and the worst approach then starting from the bottom up. And that if you could start to form conviction or a foundational understanding around a few key principles, then it will allow you to look at the problem set from a different perspective and actually allow a lot of the noise to subside. And those principles, as I described in the book, in this chapter, they start with having nothing to do with Bitcoin, and they start to have to do with some foundational ideas around money. So you don't even have to be thinking about Bitcoin in the context, and you really necessarily even shouldn't. That you should think about the question about money first, and then once you start to develop an understanding of that, then think about it in relation to Bitcoin. And then from there, then you can start to build up from the bottom to then evaluate the broader problem of does it make sense for there to be 1,000 forms of money? Because if I could first come to the conclusion that it only makes sense for there to be one, then I start to evaluate, well, what are the things about money that make money important? And does Bitcoin share those properties? From there, then you can start to say, well, if money converges to one and Bitcoin shares all the best properties of money, maybe I just need Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's unfortunately, like you say in the book, the trap for the venture capitalist out there, or the hedge fund manager out there that's looking at this, is to just throw darts at like 6 or 7 of the other cryptocurrencies and hope one of them comes good. So they're completely missing the point because they're coming from that top down kind of view rather than the bottom up. And so that is the first point of the flow chart, right? Is money a basic necessity? Do we all agree on that?
Right. And I think so, like, we'll go into that one, but like in order to get to Bitcoin as the incoming dominant form of money that everyone's going to have to accept by necessity, just kind of setting the stage for people that it's first asking the question, is money a basic necessity? Then asking the question, is money a collective hallucination? Then asking the question, does money converge to one common medium, combination of in each local economy, and then building up to the global economy? And then the questions about Bitcoin come in. And so in this equation, I start at, is money a basic necessity? And that I try to meet people with this point that is, a lot of people went to school and they might have had an economics course. I got an economics degree in college. They don't talk about what money is. So if you accept that you might be looking at Bitcoin thinking it's an investment, I need to think about this like a tech investment, or I need to think about this like a stock or a financial asset. If you just step back and accept that you've never actually questioned what money is, and that it's an entirely different dilemma than investing in a company or a financial asset that is designed to make money and then pay you out returns in money, then you can come at this from a perspective of humility. I've never asked myself the question, or at least prior to this journey, I'd never asked my question, well, why is the dollar money? At the time, also, I was someone who did not have an appreciation for gold. On my journey to Bitcoin, I had to gain an appreciation. I talk about it a little bit in another chapter. Bitcoin's not backed by nothing. But as it relates to this, just accepting, you never sat down and contemplated what makes one form of money better than another, what makes money money. And that when you start to think about the function of money, it is distinct from every other good or service in the economy. And the distinction is between one of consumption and exchange. All other goods are consumed, whether it's gas, food, healthcare, sports, everything else is consumed. Cars, boats, whatever you want to stack up. Money is distinct from all those other goods because it's actually helping to coordinate trade and economic activity between all the participants in an economy, local or global, however small you want to go thinking about an economy to however large. And that if you start to think about the function of money and how money works, it's this, you start to realize that very basic necessities that you come to take for granted, you have taken, because you've never actually questioned what makes something money or not, you've necessarily taken money for granted, and that's okay. Everybody has. And that's where humility comes into this. The second part is that if you think about something extremely complicated, like an iPhone, and you think about, I don't know how many people work at Apple, but it's something like 50,000 people or around that order of magnitude. That no one person, Steve Jobs didn't create the iPhone. He had to bring a bunch of people together to coordinate all the different resources or components that could go into a phone. And that the way that Apple was able to coordinate all those resources, in this case, employees, was by having money to pay them. And so if you think about an Apple iPhone or an airplane, one of the ones I like to call out is a grocery store, because it's, you might look at getting on a plane as a luxury, or having an iPhone as a luxury. But if you just think about a grocery store and think about 10,000 goods in a single store, and you think about all the people that had to conspire to allow you to mindlessly walk through a grocery store and get every food you could need, aimlessly wandering the store and thoughtlessly doing it, just picking up the steak, whatever. No short of, to get 10,000 goods in a single store, you needed 100 million people minimum. If you start to think about all the supply chains of the components of the individual goods, if you think about the construction of the store, if you think about all the telecommunications in the store that's managing inventory, if you think about all the software that's actually in the inventory system, if you think about the payments, if you think about every component that goes into that, there's no fewer than 100 million people that conspired to get all those things into one store, and that it couldn't be possible if not for money. And that money is the economic good that helps to coordinate basic necessities in life. Like, you wouldn't have food at the grocery store, you wouldn't have clean water showing up to your house, you wouldn't have a hospital down the road that has somebody trained in heart surgery in the moment's notice if you need a heart surgery, if not for the coordination function of money. And so part of the principle is that this is a turtles all the way down equation if you do not accept that human beings stand to gain from trade and specialization. And that in order to trade beyond a very basic barter system, you need money. And if you start to think about that function, that you would not have near the standard of living, or it just couldn't happen economically if not for the function of money. So whereas sometimes money is lamented as the root of all evil, it's really the single most important economic good. And if you think that water is necessary to your survival as a basic necessity, money is necessary to your basic survival, because it is the good that makes water show up to your house, because it's coordinated all those resources. And that's an important part to start at. It is a very basic necessity. Everyone, if they want to have clean water, power, access to telecommunications, access to medicine, they have to have a good form of money. And so maybe I'll just pause there of like accepting that you haven't really consciously considered this if you haven't first, started down the what is money rabbit hole. And as you get into that, thinking about like, it's not a luxury good. Like, Bitcoin is not a luxury good. Money is not a luxury good. It is something that you have to have as one of the core foundations of the basic functioning of an economy, and to get the other basic necessities that you have to survive.
And yeah, you mentioned economic degrees, but I'd also call on those people that are sitting there with like an MBA. How many times did you go through those case studies without even regarding for 1 second what money was? That function behind absolutely every decision that had been made. When you're looking at like the Black and Decker case study from 1970, whenever, you didn't ask the question, right? What is money? What is actually happening behind the doors? All of that economic activity, and it is truly the most basic necessity, or other people would say that it's the most saleable good, right? Because everybody wants it.
Right. And I would say that, and I can say this with a fair degree of, authority or conference, however you want to think about it, that having an economics degree, that was never taught. the way I would describe it is money is assumed as a given, and then every other economic question or dilemma builds off the assumption that it's there and working. And that if you don't question why it is there and working, then every other economic assumption or decision you make on top of that is potentially terribly flawed.
Yeah.
And that the most important question to contemplate is what makes money money. And the way I try to relate it in the book is helping people understand that because even like money becomes the most saleable good, but it's why, why? Like that's the output of it. And without it though, you are lost because, just imagine if you had to go hunt for every ounce of food you needed and also drill oil and also refine that oil to gas and then go down to the local stream and figure out how to purify your water so you're not sick because you have disease, right? Imagine if you had to do all that in the same day. Money is the very basic necessity that allows you to trade with others so that you can focus on one specific thing and trade with everybody else in the economic system. And that is a basic necessity, not a luxury. It is not a nice to have. It's a have to have if you want any standard of living that's beyond like the hunter-gatherer.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to come on to point number 2. I think we're going to enjoy this one. I've actually got a clip I want to play to you. I'm sure you've seen it. Let me share my screen so those watching on YouTube will be able to see it as well. Hang on a second. All right. Oh, I thought I had it bookmarked. Where's it gone? Yeah, it is. Svetsky. Shout out to Svetsky for sharing this one. Here we go.
As a historian, I don't like it because this is a money built on distrust. The central idea of Bitcoin is basically electronic gold, that we don't trust the banks, the governments, so we don't want to give them the ability to create as much money as they like. So we create this Bitcoin. It's a currency of distrust. I do think that the future belongs to electronic money, but what we've seen over the last centuries is that it's actually a good idea to give banks and governments the ability to create more and more money in order to build more trust within society. So I'm not sure what money would look like in 20 years or 30 years, but I hope it will be a currency of greater trust and not a currency of distrust.
All right. So for those who are wondering who this maniac is, that's Yuval Noah Harari, author of the book Sapiens, and I can't remember the other one that he wrote. Didn't read it. That was filmed between the 6th to the 8th of May at the Bank of International Settlements Summit. So you've got this maniac who represents the WEF because he's Klaus's lapdog in like at the conference of the final boss, talking about Bitcoin being built on distrust. And he's famously known for, in Sapiens, shilling the idea that money is a collective hallucination, which is incredible that a historian and an anthropologist with his mega brain could come to such an incredibly retarded idea. So, I mean, let's bat the ball back and forth on that one. Where do you want to start on, is money a collective hallucination?
Yeah. So on this journey, if you kind of first, after a little bit of thought, accept money is a very basic necessity, then in this next question of, okay, well, is money a collective hallucination, or is there some rhyme or reason to how money works and why money works? That and it is, I don't, that guy Harari is like one of the worst human beings out there, just, and I don't know for what reason, but this idea, because it is put out there by people that money is a collective hallucination, or they'll say it's a belief system. And strange for an anthropologist, quote, trust the science, to believe that money is a hallucination while also believing that humans are rational, and that humans can't both be rational and hallucinating about the most important economic good that exists, money, to coordinate economic activity. So if we've accepted that money is a basic necessity and it is an economic good that exists, even if we can't explain why yet, it exists and it helps coordinate all the resources to get all of our needs and wants there at the ready to willingly trade, in return for the money. And what I put forward is to people that money is not a collective hallucination. It's not a belief system, because the other thing that people will say if they, if they're asked the question, why does money have value? They might say, if they don't say it's a collective hallucination or a belief system, they might say, because we all believe it has value, which is a little bit of a different way of saying the same thing. And some people even say, well, Bitcoin has value because we believe it has value. It's like, no, that is not true. It is that we need money to trade. We need money that has certain properties to allow it to be effective in trade, and that there are objective properties that make certain goods better or worse at affecting trade than others. And that you have to reject this idea that if money is necessary to coordinate all trade, you have to reject the idea that humans are irrational and are just coincidentally hallucinating on the same good over and over again to affect that trade. And that if you start to think about the rhyme or reason behind why people would converge on a certain good as money, the first thing to accept is that that there's thousands of goods in the world, thousands, millions. And just take dollars as an example, or euros or pounds. Like, of all the thousands of goods, why that one? Start there, right? Because you either have to start from the point of it's a hallucination and everyone just woke up and it was the dollar, but realistically, if they just read history, they can go back and learn how the world converged on gold as money. And then the question might be, well, why gold? But before you even get there, just accepting that there are thousands of goods. Here there is this thing, money, that is a very basic necessity. And it is, there is a reality that it is actually coordinating trade amongst billions of people, and that the market either converges on a good to facilitate the function of money for objective reasons or entirely random coincidental reasons. So which side of the fence do you believe, if money has emerged as this good to be a very basic necessity to coordinate trade, do you think that if humans gravitated to the very rational need for a medium to facilitate trade, then they would somehow become very irrational in what good to choose in order to do that? Of course not. And the reality is that every good has different properties, and that human beings converge on certain forms of money based on the objective properties that those goods have, based on the properties that one would need to consistently and effectively and efficiently pursue trade within their local economy and within the global economy.
And you've got a little paragraph here from Hayek, right, on this particular subject. I have deliberately used the word marvel to shock the reader out of the complacency with which we often take the working of this mechanism for granted. I am convinced that if it were the result of deliberate human design, and if the people guided by the price changes understood that their decisions have significance far beyond their immediate aim, this mechanism would have been acclaimed as one of the greatest triumphs of the human mind. Its misfortune is the double one that it is not the product of human design, and that the people guided by it usually do not know why they are made to do what they do. I mean, this is pure Austrian economics, and like someone like Harari that beats this drum so loudly. And you mentioned it earlier as well, like people beat the drum as well about money being the root of all evil. No wonder people are so confused. Well, they're not even confused because they've not, as we've discussed, they've not asked the question. What is money? So
yeah, and that quote too kind of built on this idea of money, but then also this very important idea of a price system. And that when you start to realize that, another thing that I didn't mention, and I think this is something that is a tenet of Austrian economics, but it's also just objectively true, that all value is subjective. There is no intrinsic value. That our ability to actually think about, measure the idea of value is dependent on the world actually converging on a single form of money. And there's this other idea that money converges to one, or the economic systems converge to one, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But before you even get there, it's that in order to think about value in a numerical sense or in a quantified sense, that first this idea of a price system needs to exist, or the existence of a single price. And when you start to think about how that could possibly be, that it actually necessitates everybody converging on one common medium in order to get the output, which is the possibility of a price system. You need a common medium to price things in. And that when you think about why that is important, just think about yourself. You have maybe a salary, and you know what your rent costs, and you know what your car costs, you know what gas costs, you know what food costs, and you're doing all these economic calculations, but you're only able to do them. You're only even able to conceive or to have a conception of your own value by price signals and your ability to equate what in numerical sense you're able to earn relative to what other goods cost or are priced at. And what Hayek was describing there was that this emergence of a price system and its consequence emerged very organically, very rationally, but organically, and it wasn't the product of, quote, human design. Somebody did not sit down and think about, I got this great idea. It was just a natural phenomenon that emerged on the market for very rational reasons to solve a problem of trade, and that it couldn't exist if not for a large group of people using one form of money. And again, then it comes back to, well, if the rational need to trade exists, and if where the turtles all the way down problem stops is that humans benefit from trade and specialization, then humans who are rational to realize that then seek out the best medium. And the only reason why I say medium or good is because what then emerged from this very organic system is what came to be termed money, the good that is used to trade with people. So, kind of recognizing on both sides of that it was both rational. And if it was rational, then there must be objective reasons. And then the output of it is this phenomenon of incredible importance and value, which is a price system. And that price system couldn't exist without mass convergence on a single form of money.
So as this expert historian and anthropologist sits there and lectures us on what money is, how does he square that then with, people coming to the realization, as many years as you want to go back? I mean, we've been talking about dollars, but we can talk about feathers or bones or, marbles, precious stones or wampum shells, where people converged on that medium of exchange. Like, I can't believe the words that come out of his mouth when he's written a book about the anthropology of our species. And he either understands it and is just towing the line, or he's completely missed it.
Well, in his case, I would say probably he's a very shallow thinker, doesn't actually understand the way the world works. And so on this question, because he wasn't capable to figure out an actual logical, rational, objective answer to the question of what money is, then that leaves someone in a position of searching for, well, if I can't explain it, then I will basically give a non-answer that it just exists and it is, and it's a hallucination. So
Right.
if you start from the perspective that, I don't even know what his first name is, but Harari, if you start from the perspective of he's not a, I won't say not an intelligent person, because Bitcoin is so much more, money is so much more about common sense. This really isn't an IQ test. So he's someone of low common sense. Well, I would start to question a lot of anything else that guy has to say about anything, right? I don't know. There's a certain, I don't know if it's like the Gallman effect or something, where like once you realize that somebody's wrong entirely about something, then, and it's something that they might be looked to as an expert on, then anything else that they say, you look through a different lens of, if they're wrong about this other thing and they have no absolute idea, and then they're building assumptions off of it, then any of their assumptions are certainly wrong, and I shouldn't listen to that person about anything.
So what he's basically trying to say is like, some dude was sitting around the campfire all the way back in the cave dwelling days and said, right, tomorrow, he drew up a great big plan. Tomorrow we're all going to wake up, we're all going to start using feathers, and I'm going to go around and gaslight everybody into believing it because I've invented this, and it's going to be a shared hallucination.
Yeah, there's a quote, I think it was originally from Abraham Lincoln, where he said, you can, I'll bastardize it, but I might get it right. You can fool some of the people all the time. You can fool all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And so either everyone's gotten fooled all the time and been gaslit, which is like, you can gaslit certain people, you can sell a certain class of people snake oil, but the truth comes out. The truth, and for the reason that there is objective truth, and for the reason that humans are rational. And so I just think that, in this case, what I would guide the fresh eyes on this for a person trying to understand Bitcoin is that just accept that humans are rational. Because in order to believe, at least on this equation, that money is a collective hallucination, is that you would have to accept that humans are rational in needing money and recognizing that need, but then entirely irrational in terms of what money they choose. And so, if you accept that, then the other consequence is, with whatever Bitcoin is worth today in total, $1 trillion, either we're all, quote, collectively hallucinating, or we are acting rationally. And it's on you to figure out, like, do you think that humans are really capable of collectively hallucinating to $1 trillion, or that there might be some objective reasons? Now, people can be wrong about what objective reasons they are, or there are, but it's still upon you to recognize that there is rational economic behavior. And then you need to figure out, well, what is the objective set of criteria that I need to evaluate to make the decision as to whether or not, while people are rational, they're not always right, whether the rational response is also the right response.
All right. I think we've nailed that point. So money is not a collective hallucination. So the first 2 points, is money a basic necessity? Yes. Is it a collective hallucination? No. Do economic systems converge on a single form of money?
Yes.
Right.
So what I start people here at is the highest level, which is first accept that the world previously converged on one form of money, and that was gold. You don't need to understand gold. You probably need to understand some about the fact that you need to accept the fact that the world converged on it as a form of money.
Organically.
Organically. And realistically, all forms of fiat currency emerged only because there were pre-existing commodity-based monies like gold. Not every country was on the gold standard. And that when I talk about the world converging on one form of money, it doesn't mean that there isn't some long tail, small percentage of economic activity that gets facilitated in another currency. It means converges, like converging to one, converging to the entire world, working on one currency while also accepting that cigarettes are still used as currency and money in jail. So it is not 100%, but it is a 99.9 type scenario.
Are cigarettes being used as currency in jail a shared hallucination?
I do not believe so.
So carry on. I just wanted another dig at Harari there. So yeah.
Yeah. So just accepting that at the macro level, the world previously converged on gold. And it also doesn't mean that people can't be wrong. China and India went on the silver standard and they got their wealth expropriated from them. So you can choose wrong, even if you were doing it for what you believe to be rational reasons. Point remains that it's still rational and objective. Now, top level, except world converge on one form of money and all the other fiat currencies that exist today. So that's the other dilemma that people run into is like, well, there's 200 fiat currencies, but virtually all of them emerged off of gold. So start there. The world previously converged on one form of money. The question to ask is why, and is it by coincidence? Why, and is it because of a collective hallucination? Certainly not. So then try to ask yourself and answer the question of why. And then, so that's the macro level. This phenomenon previously happened. The micro level is that 99.9% of all people in the world and all entities in the world only transact in a single currency on a daily basis. Think about like yourself in this case. If you're in Europe and you're only transacting in euros, or if you're in the US and only transacting in dollars, you're going to the grocery store, things are priced in dollars, you're spending dollars. You go to the gas station, priced in dollars, buying in dollars. Doctor, priced in dollars, So yes, certain people live in borders. You might be in Europe and go to the UK and spend pounds. You might be in the US and go to Mexico and spend pesos. But 99.9% of people on a daily basis are only transacting in one form of money. And again, the question is why? And is it by coincidence? It's not by coincidence. And the way that I explain it, or like the core idea behind this, is that convergence on one form of money is dictated by the nature of the problem that money helps to solve. And it is one that is intersubjective between multiple people in needing to facilitate trade and exchange. So if humans accept that they stand to gain and benefit from trade and specialization, and that's rational. If they accept that money is not a collective hallucination, and that the money that is chosen for rational, objective reasons, then the explanation for why money converges to one is because the nature of trade necessarily involving two people, I have to have the form of money that you're willing to accept, and you must accept the form of money that I have. So we must have come to some consensus as to which money we both individually and collectively accept. And if I'm going to pay you in a form of money, that part of your evaluation of what money to accept is dependent on what all the other people that you need to trade with are willing to accept. And that evaluation as to what money other people are willing to accept is related to what money you are willing to accept. And that can either be because of a collective hallucination or because of an objective set of properties. When you're looking at various different goods to trade, that what are the properties that make future exchange most efficient? And so before getting into what those objective properties are, it's first accepting that if I have to trade with you and I have to have the form of money that you're willing to accept, and then the next guy has to accept the form of money that you have, that problem is intersubjective and that it extends out to all 8 billion people in the world, because the nature of trade is interpersonal, intersubjective, but also the function of money at its core, what it's doing is bridging the present to the future, bridging the present exchange to a series of future exchanges, and that you have the dilemma of needing to preserve the value that you've traded in the present into the future as best you possibly can. And that it's also not a coincidence that the properties in certain goods that will allow it to store value over time are random. So I'll stop there and then can kind of answer questions about kind of the convergence dilemma.
Yeah. So, and this is where it's still, after all these years, this is where it completely humbles me what's going on right now in with Bitcoin. And people have called it Bitcoin 2.0. I don't think that does it any justice at all. But when you look back again in history, and a historian or anthropologist should have realized, this convergence on gold that happened organically. It wasn't just one day somebody woke up and said, right, from this day forth, we're all going to use gold as money. Like that was just complete nonsense. I mean, the gold rush itself in the US, go west, young man, people were risking life and limb to get across the plains and get across the mountains to go and find gold. And when they got there, the local tribes people, they had no idea why these people were turning up. Gold was not, it had not been, they had not converged yet. This was a completely natural phenomenon, completely organic. And that's what's going on in Bitcoin today. But my God, it's going on that quick because we're all connected.
Yeah, because information can spread a lot faster, but also just kind of kind of focusing for, someone that's really might struggle with this problem of like looking at Bitcoin and it being difficult to see, recognizing that, we're not even getting into the Bitcoin part, right? Like we're just talking about how money is a basic necessity. It's not a hallucination. And this very important phenomenon that money converges to one. If you evaluate all of those things under the guise that in some way, guided way, humans are rational, and that there is objective, while things are relative, there is objective truth in the world, that if you can start with the fact that you only trade in one form of money on a daily basis, like trade in the sense of like buying goods and services, everyone randomly accepts those. It's not random. And that the world previously converged on one, that if somebody comes to these three conclusions, money is not a basic necessity, or money is a basic necessity, money is not a collective hallucination, and the world converges on one form of money, then when we think about the problem that we started with of, oh, there's 1,000 currencies, but if all of those prior three statements are true, I believe them to be fundamentally true. Each person has to question them. But if you came to that conclusion, basic necessity, not a hallucination, money converges to one common medium for very objective and by its nature reasons, then a human being has a rational way to say, I need to find the best form of money. Now, what makes for the best form of money? Because it is a set of properties. And if you first identify the properties and then you start to see, you look at one good and you say, do these properties exist? Then you start to be able to quickly eliminate 99% of the field based on a relative comparison of properties. But if you didn't start from that point, if you didn't start from that bottom up, then it still would be impossible to go through 1,000 possibilities from top down. That is why this logic to build up to, and very importantly, money converging to one is so important, because you don't need 1,000. Start from the principles that make the one form of money the best. And then if you've gotten there, then you're saying, well, what maximizes or optimizes for these properties? Because if I'm evaluating it based on properties, then I know that money converges to one, and I have an objective reason to be able to anchor to why the world will also come to the conclusion that I did, because everyone else is out there objectively evaluating all different goods relative to each other, subconsciously or consciously, based on these same set of properties that make money functional to actually coordinate trade.
And one point you did make, and we shouldn't brush over, is the only reason these fiat currencies exist, was by function of, being on a gold standard and those promissory notes being actually backed by gold in the first place, until that was rug pulled in 1971 when Nixon took the world off the gold standard. And now we have much more of a petrodollar system, and the dollar being king.
Yeah, now that's probably a conversation for another day, and the Bitcoin is not backed by nothing, because it is the right question of, well, why did gold emerge as money? And then what were the properties that allowed it to have all the other thousands, tens of thousands of goods? And then do those properties exist in Bitcoin? The rest of this chapter, I talk about the actual properties that, in my view, or my evaluation and my framework that I put forward, is that there are functionally 3 critical properties, that not only properties, but 3 most critical or most summary level properties that a good must have all 3 of in order to be viable as money, and how that relates to Bitcoin.
We'll come back to that one, because that is another chapter. So we will do that justice. But the next part of this particular diagram is where you want to move to. So we're going to talk about those 3 properties. Is Bitcoin more scarce than any other form of money?
Yeah, and so let me lay the landscape of, so if you've gotten down to the point of all the prior fundamental questions about money before even getting to Bitcoin, then you start to evaluate, okay, well, what are the properties that make something a better form of money? What I put forward, we'll go through them one by one, but it's thinking about these things in relation to each other. Relative scarcity, but ultimately in Bitcoin, finite scarcity, as the foundation for why something will store value over time. Needing to combine that with the ability to have a good that is possible to be divided and aggregated, to be able to functionally both measure value as well as exchange value. But then a key component of the ability to exchange value is that good that is both most relatively scarce, that can be divided and aggregated, can actually be able to be transferred. So it's kind of this scarcity component combined with measurability and divisibility and aggregation, and the capability to do that, as well as, okay, well, if we're solving the problem of trade, I actually have to be able to transfer and exchange a very scarce good that is also capable of being divided and aggregated. But a key component is the actual transferability of it. But starting with the foundation of scarcity, the way I often relate this to people is that always going back to common sense of, if you could be paid in a form of money that could be easily printed, or a form of money that could not, before getting into the question of whether something is or isn't money, your common sense answer is, I'd rather be paid in a form of money that cannot be printed easily. and that you know intuitively and based on common sense as well as the real world lived experience that if you went and got a barrel of oil out of the ground, and that takes a certain amount of human capital, a certain in terms of know-how, a certain amount of time, and a certain amount of physical capital, and you were to trade that form of money that could be easily printed, in the sense that the money that you received in exchange could be created for very little work, that if your intentional purpose is to store value between a present exchange and a future exchange, that a form of money that can be easily printed is going to store value less well than a form of money that cannot be printed. And so when I kind of frame this question of, is Bitcoin the most scarce form of money, it is both the most relatively scarce form of money, as well as having this very unique property of finite scarcity. If Bitcoin is finitely scarce, and the only, and what I also describe for people without prior knowledge, is that Bitcoin has fundamental value, not intrinsic, but fundamental value in the world because of its fixed supply, because it represents a form of money that cannot be printed. The real innovation in Bitcoin is figuring out, and going back to Harari's point, is it's only possible because it is devoid of trust, that Bitcoin could not enforce its fixed supply unless it was trustless. Everyone can reliably trust Bitcoin because its enforcement of fixed supply is not dependent on trust. But that if Bitcoin can credibly enforce its fixed supply, and the most important term is credible, then it is the most scarce form of money because it is both finitely scarce and relatively scarce. And that another way to think about this equation is, assume that there were a form of money that could be increased at 5% a year, and then go to a form of money that could be increased at 4% a year, and then 3%, and then 2%, and then 1%, that zero, that is finite scarcity, and that does become optimal. And then someone might go to the question of like, well, wouldn't it be better if it could actually decline? Wouldn't that be even more scarce? And the answer is no. That the absolute rate of change is relevant. And because then the question is, well, if you're destroying some amount of currency by what process? Who's it coming from? Someone's, arbitrarily losing their money. That doesn't work either. So scarcity is important, and also recognizing too that scarcity for scarcity's sake is not what's relevant. If the way to think about that, two kind of bookends. Imagine there were one thing in the world and it was absolutely scarce, like a Rembrandt. It's not a good form of money. It might be unique to one, and it might be incredibly scarce, but it's not a utility as money. And again, the question is why. Another kind of explanation of that is thinking about if there were 21 million Bitcoin, and that, accept that for now as true, definitely verify in terms of how and why it's possible, because that's the real innovation. But if there were 21 million Bitcoin and only one person valued it, or say only one person had it, there'd be nothing scarce about Bitcoin. So accept that this idea of scarcity, not for scarcity's sake, that the reason why scarcity is important is because it is a utility, specifically in facilitating trade and exchange. And for this purpose of, if that good can be traded and exchanged, then the one that is most scarce is going to store value between a present exchange and a future exchange. And that is the whole point. That the foundational property of one form of money being better than another, all other things equal, and all other things are not equal, but all other things equal, is scarcity drives the utility, because that scarcity will result in value being stored more effectively and more efficiently between one exchange and another.
And you've written a beautiful sentence. 21 million becomes ever smaller as more individuals adopt Bitcoin.
Yeah, and that's really important to recognize, that scarcity is a two-sided equation. The supply is finitely scarce. Demand continues to grow because the fact that there is a form of money out there that is finitely scarce, but that Bitcoin actually becomes more scarce as more people demand it. It also becomes a greater utility. It also becomes more secure as more people demand it. But just on the scarcity part, thinking about it and saying, hey, if one person had all the Bitcoin in the world, Bitcoin's not scarce, it's not a utility. If 21 million people started to demand Bitcoin, they all had one Bitcoin, Bitcoin starts to become scarce. But then imagine if a billion people started to demand Bitcoin, 21 million Bitcoin becomes ever more scarce. 8 billion people, the entire world. 21 million is an incredibly small number, but it's only both scarce as well as a utility because of its scarcity in what it can actually be used to do and the other properties that are paired with it. But that is a very important concept, that it's not scarcity for scarcity's sake, and that scarcity is not just about supply. It is the basis for demand, but Bitcoin becomes more scarce and becomes a greater constant to facilitate exchange as demand for it rises.
And it's that constant that is so damn important, right? The 21 million. And this is something, again, that Harari got completely wrong in that little gaslighting video that we were all subjected to, where he was basically saying, I can't quote him exactly, but he said along the lines of, it's been a good idea to give governments the power to print money when they need to. Whereas Bitcoiners, we will tell you, we'll sit here until we're blue in the face explaining to you why that is an incredibly bad idea, and why a fixed supply and this constant, this economic constant, which I mean, first time in human history that we've had an economic constant, 21 million.
Yeah, and like to think about Harari's quote of, and to relate people, there's a word that I use to describe it as a constant. And that when you think about like finite scarcity as a fixed line, like that being a constant, but then what does that actually mean? And Harari is making an argument for, as do a lot of shallow thinking Keynesian economics professors and academics, that variability versus constants in money is important. And the way, I have a chart, I don't know what page it's on, but the chart where I have kind of the concept of two goods and then money in between, and accepting that the supply of money being, in Bitcoin's case, finitely constant or finitely scarce, but even in prior existing forms of money like gold being the relative constant, the thing that is least susceptible to change in supply, everything else is variable around it. So I think I used the example of oil versus an iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
Both the supply of oil is variable as well as the demand for oil is variable. The supply of iPhones is variable. The demand for iPhones is variable. If the demand for iPhones increases 10x, they will make 10x the amount of iPhones to be able to vary the supply to meet the demand. Money is a utility in that it provides a relative constant from the supply standpoint, and that is what allows both prices to beginning to form, the price of one good versus the price of another, and also recognizing that part of it is that the demand for money is variable. The thing that makes everything work is that its supply be constrained, and that becomes a utility in coordinating and communicating all the information to be able to affect trade for all the variable things around it. And then the common sense thing to think about would be just in your own life. Over the last 4 years, as they printed in the US, at least I'll speak to, $5 trillion, was that good for you or not? Think about trying to run a business when everything in the world is changing around you, and then also insert this massive problem of the money being massively increased in supply, such that you as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, really anybody working for a business, are trying to evaluate whether the changes in price around you are a function of changes in actual economic activity changes in actual supply and demand for oil, changes in actual supply and demand of foods, changes in actual supply and demand of iPhones, or are the prices just changing because the money is massively increasing? Or to isolate it further, you're suddenly put into a dilemma of what percentage of this price change is because the money. If you can eliminate the changes in the supply of money from the equation, then you can more reasonably evaluate all the other information around you, because prices will continue to change. They will only be changing for economic reasons that have to do with the supply of demand of goods, not because and for the express purpose that the money is changing. And so my perspective on it, and I explain it in the book, is that the changing of the money supply is actually a detriment to the economic system, and the constants of the money supply is what actually allows money to function in coordinating trade, and that the economic good with the greatest constant, and in Bitcoin's case, the finite scarcity, that it will most effectively coordinate trade because it will be a far more communicator of information, price, as well as the ability to actually exchange in that medium, essentially trading finite scarcity, such that the information and the signals that are being sent around from the economy, you can know if you take out entirely that it's not coming from the changes in the money supply, that it must be because the economic realities around me, the supply and demand for oil, the availability of certain goods is either becoming more abundant or more scarce, or more people are valuing it.
All right. So is Bitcoin more scarce than any other form of money? I think you'd say 100% yes, no doubt.
Yeah. And what I would say there is that Bitcoin is the greatest constant for a combination of reasons. It is finitely scarce. It's credibly enforced without the need for trust. And that it means that it's not susceptible to change. So when you add those three things up, it's finitely scarce, it's credibly enforced without the need for trust, and then what follows from that is it's not subject to arbitrary change, is when you're evaluating it, right? And it's also this idea that Bitcoin's not scarce because software code magically says it is, that the credibility is very important, how that affects it. But when you're evaluating it at this point, it's just like follow the logic and then get to the point later on to say, okay, well, how does this happen? Like first to say, okay, if it were to be true, does Bitcoin provide the greatest constant? And then it also accept that it's not coincidental, that it must be credibly enforced, and that if it can be credibly enforced, then you also know that you can rely on it because it's not subject to arbitrary change.
And then we move on to the next asset here, or attribute. Is Bitcoin more easily divisible than any other form of money? How would somebody think about that? Or why should they think about divisibility when it comes to money?
Yeah. So if we're starting always from the problem of money is solving the problem of trade and exchange, that two things are not of like value. And so if we've previously come to the conclusion that for very rational reasons, money converges to one, then one common medium, in order to be effective as money, must be able to measure things both large and small within an economy, because not only are things not of equal value, but human beings need to consume things that are both large and small. Like, for example, a bottle of water. What is the value of a bottle of water relative to a car or a home? And that if money converges to one, and there's certain people that produce bottles of water, and there's certain people that are producing cars, the same economic good needs to be able to both measure the value of one thing, but also measure relative value of all things, as well as then at the end of the day, always remember, actually be able to facilitate the exchange. And so if we think about certain goods, like as an example, like just as scarcity is not relevant for scarcity's sake, the ability to divide and aggregate and measure things is not a benefit in the context of money just for the sake of measurement. So an example would be a ruler. A ruler is something that is designed to measure things, but it's a terrible form of money. Couldn't be a form of money, and no one will confuse it as a form of money because rulers aren't scarce. But also, if you divide a ruler, it stops becoming functional as a ruler. It can measure fewer things. And so because we're solving the problem of trade and because there are things large and small, you need one common medium that can say, here's $1 for the bottle of water, or here's $45,000 for a car. Not many things in the world can be both scarce and capable of measuring. And part of the ability to measure is this ability to both divide a unit into small units or aggregate it into large units. And so thinking about it, saying like, I can send 1 Bitcoin to you for some good, or I could send 0.001 Bitcoin. That becomes valuable because it's necessary, because there are such a wide range of things of value, and the money that is going to emerge as the one that everyone converges on is capable of valuing, measuring things large and small, the most things in the economy, but actually also being able to exchange those. And so another way that I relate this to people is that value of Bitcoin is really an output of adoption. In that, when you think about if there were 21, if there were 21 million people and each had a Bitcoin, then there's only a certain amount of trade that can be facilitated between those people. But if there were 210 million or 2.1 billion people, that Bitcoin can be divided and aggregated to be able to facilitate the commerce between all of those people. If you, just on a very common sense level, without getting too like academic or philosophical, just going back to the rule, if you can't divide and aggregate, how can you actually facilitate trade? How can you actually measure things effectively from a monetary standpoint? You can't. And part of the goal is to be able to trade with the widest and largest group of people. Another example is the limitation of gold. Imagine you have a gold coin, and that gold coin is worth, or say a gold bar is worth something like $50,000. How do you trade for all the things that are smaller than the equivalent of $50,000? Because it's a bottle of water, and you can't just hand the guy, across from you a $50,000 gold bar. So yes, like using gold as an example, you can melt gold down, you can put it into smaller units, but it still stands that because of the nature of trade, you need to be able to divide and aggregate to be able to measure things large and small, because there's a wide range of value. And functionally, in order to facilitate all your needs and wants, you need to be able to access both things of small value on a regular basis, as well as things of significant value. And you need to find the one good that's capable of doing all of that. And when you start to think about all the goods that exist in the world, you will not find many goods that are both incredibly scarce as well as they're capable of divided and aggregated to actually measure and facilitate trade.
And, to use a modern day example, you walk in, I don't know, you're picking up a newspaper or something. I don't know what they are these days. Who cares? I don't read them, but maybe they're 30 pence, 50 pence. And you've got a 50-pound note, or it's 30 cents and you got $100 bill. Like, that shopkeeper is not going to be that, enamored with the fact that you're going to be handing over $100 bill, but that's what you got. Whereas if you have Bitcoin on your phone, it's just zap, zap, bing, done.
Yeah.
You can break it down even smaller than that.
Yep. Yeah, and like think about it's like if you have $100 bill and you go to the store and it only costs $1 and the person doesn't have change, you can't actually get the good.
Right.
Right.
You're hamstrung.
But something was happening. One form of money was measuring things both large and small, but it couldn't facilitate trade because it was denominated in a unit that was difficult to divide.
Mhm.
Right. And so it still affected the measurement, but it couldn't facilitate the exchange.
So Bitcoin fixes this. It is the most divisible form of money.
Yeah. So Bitcoin is both the most scarce form of money. It's the most divisible because I did gloss over this. Bitcoin can be divided into 100 million subunits. So the smallest unit of Bitcoin is less than the equivalent of a penny. And Bitcoin can be aggregated to, now Bitcoin isn't worth more than every single entity in the world just yet, but at $1 trillion, it can functionally purchase and transfer value for as large of a thing in the actual economy as you'd like to purchase, as well as the smallest thing. And that is incredibly important to something being viable and functional as money.
Which brings us on to the last attribute here. Is Bitcoin more easily transferable than any other form of money? And you're up against like this is a big one, right? Because people are making cross-currency exchanges. I worked in foreign exchange markets. You worked in hedge funds. We've seen billions of dollars throughout our career get pinged around the world at, in a matter of seconds. So, you're up against some big, like the Swift, payment system there. So, is it more easily transferable than other forms?
So my answer to that question is yes. The explanation for it is that what I'm talking about is the actual underlying mechanism, like the technological layer, that the operation to send Bitcoin over a communication channel, the ability, like it's real mic drop on its, instantiation as money, it has this property of finite scarcity. It's more easily divisible than any other money because it can divide into 100 million subunits. And something with those two properties can be transferred over a communication channel without the need for trust. So me being able to sit right here, like, yes, you need tools to make it easier and easier and easier, and those tools are being developed, but the actual operation is instant, right? If I wanted to send you $100,000, I could do that right now and nobody could stop me. And as soon as I did it, it would be done. So I've just been able to transfer to you finite scarcity. Now, if I tried to send $100,000 to the US banking system, it is a system that's entirely, to Harari's point, that's based on trust. And so in theory, they could do that, but in practice, they got to put up a lot of guardrails because that's a lot of money. And it's a permission system versus Bitcoin, which is a permissionless system. And so the mechanisms that are in place to actually allow that to happen or not allow it to happen is a far less efficient system than Bitcoin. That Bitcoin is this only thing in the world, because the consequence of it, of the legacy system being trusted, is that they can print a bunch of it, right? Because they have to, quote, trust the banks who have abused that trust time and time again. And that's this important thing too, when I tell people to think about this equation: scarcity, ability to divide and aggregate, ability to transfer. Score each of those as being critically important. Some good has to have all of those in order to be viable as a form of money. So you might look at it and say, well, it's really easy to swipe a credit card. I might challenge that because more and more people are being censored. But I accept that the dollar system that's been developed over 40 to 50 years in its current form post 1970. But realistically, like, accept that the digital dollar didn't really exist until the late 90s, early 2000s. Most people were operating with cash, and checks were actually a technological advancement. That in it, it took a lot of time to make the digital dollar move very fast. But the same reasons that make it possible for the digital dollar to move very seamlessly are the same exact reasons that make it dependent on trust. And its most important property is supply. And so that is also what allows it to be susceptible to manipulation and the printing of literally $5 trillion over a couple of years. And if money doesn't have the aggregation of those three properties, with scarcity being the most important to the basis of a form of money to store value, which is the entire point of trade, it nullifies it. So it's like if you kind of like, and what I'm trying to communicate to people is, if you focus too much on any one thing, you're going to fail to see the forest for the trees. If you try to focus on too many things, because there are other properties of money that are relevant, but just scoring it on this relative scarcity, ability to be divided, aggregated, and the ability to transfer. And if in Bitcoin's case, if you work backwards from like, yes, you can transfer this over a communication channel. Yes, the tools are becoming, easier, and you might view it as clunky, but like the dollar had time to get to this point, give Bitcoin some time, but it's capable of being transferred, it's capable of being divided and aggregated. And here stands this most important property of finite scarcity, because at the end of the day, what humans are rationally evaluating what they're going to do and how they're going to do it with what medium and how, I'm giving you value today and I'm taking money in return, with the expectation or the necessity to be able to transfer that value of comparable value in the future. Most important property is its ability to store value. And that is part and parcel to being able to freely exchange. But if it doesn't start from the point of scarcity, then it's like you could move something around the world as fast as possible. It's not going to be used as money if it can be printed for nothing. So I like to think about, oftentimes people say that Bitcoin is digital gold. I think that is massively misrepresented, falls way short. Basically, Bitcoin has combined all of the attractive properties of gold while stripping out its limitations, while at the same time replicated all the attractive properties of the digital dollar while stripping out the weaknesses. So if physical gold is relatively scarce, it's not capable of easily being divided and aggregated and being easily transferred. If the digital dollar is susceptible to greater abundance because it can be easily printed, but it has this nice property of being able to be easily transferred, Bitcoin basically takes the strengths and strips out the weaknesses and puts it all together. Finite scarcity with the ability to be divided and aggregated into both very large and very small units instantly, seamlessly, as well as the ability to transfer something that has those two properties over a communication channel.
And that's where we get to the end. World domination.
World domination. So, to summarize it for folks, and again, this is on people, everyone to challenge, like, and I try to break this up into these kind of 6 different parts. The first 3 all about money, the nature of it. The last 3, the properties of money, and then whether those properties exist in Bitcoin. It's on each person to evaluate them, but that's the roadmap in my mind of when I distilled this down to, is money a basic necessity? Yes. Is money a collective hallucination? No. Does the world, or do local economies and does the global economy converge on one form of money? Yes. Now, what are the 3 things that are most important to describe the why behind why would one form of money emerge rather than another? Because everything is always, can't think about this in a vacuum. You got to compare it, and in my practice, it's Bitcoin relative to the dollar, Bitcoin relative to gold, more so than any other cryptocurrencies, but you can do the same exercise. Then it is, okay, scarcity is important, the ability to divide and aggregate is important, and the ability to transfer. And when you look at Bitcoin scoring both individually on that, but you need to put them all together because one is not valuable in a vacuum, then your conclusion will be that Bitcoin obsoletes all their money. Because if a certain unit of Bitcoin better stores value for very objective reasons rooted in its properties and the properties that make it such an attractive form of money, then it doesn't matter whether somebody has $20 or $200 million, that the properties of the money dictate whether or not it will be an effective form of money and whether or not it will be effective at storing value and functional and coordinating trade. But also recognize that you can't store the same unit of value in two different currencies at once. And if one has better properties, if currency A has better properties than currency B, then currency A is going to store value better than currency B. And it's going to do that for every person and for every unit of value. And that if and as enough people figure it out, it functionally obsoletes the need for network B. In today's world, the equivalent is we still need the legacy currencies because we're in this transitional stage over to Bitcoin. The world does converge to one. We are shifting over from the world having converged on the dollar to, and for very objective reasons, to the world converging on Bitcoin. But if you accept this AB equation, and you can certainly store some amount of value in Bitcoin and dollars, but one of those two things is going to store value better. And it's not random. And as more of the world figures it out, then more of the world shifts one way until we get to a point where the entire world is using Bitcoin, not just to store value, but to coordinate day-to-day trade. And that it's also the unit of account. But I tried to describe the why, the key decision points that could explain to you rationally why someone would choose Bitcoin over another medium. And if you came to the conclusion that it will be a better form of money is today, but as more people adopt it, even better. Those are the same objective criteria that everybody else is having to evaluate. So if you come to the conclusion, part of your conclusion is dependent on whether or not you think other people will too, whether other people are rational and whether the objective criteria that you're evaluating are the right criteria. And people can choose wrong.
Well, and humility is a huge part of that, right? How many times have you heard people say, if I figured it out, I mean, sure as hell other people are going to, because I'm certainly not the smartest guy in the world. And that all Bitcoiners feel that. And in fact, a lot of us, banging our heads against a brick wall, trying to help other people see through it and get there. And this is why I wanted to do these shows with you to help. There's going to be a lot of noobs coming in. As the price action starts, doing what it's going to do. But like to get you back to your point of world domination. Yeah. So if you're holding Bitcoin, basically, it's going to be the most desirable form of money going forward. But the other side of your world domination point, and you've got another quote in here, economic systems are an emergent property of a single form of money. We're going to see a whole new economy start to exist and build and thrive that's going to be basing itself on this single form of money, this new single form of money onto which we're all going to converge. That is incredibly exciting. And that is the other side of world domination. It's not, I think people get, stuck in a thought of, oh, brilliant, it's going to be all Lambos and mansions for me going forward because I'll be able to buy whatever I want. So no, you're going to be also part of this whole new service industry, absolutely everything that is going to be built on top of, the fact that we are about to converge onto a new and single form of economic activity and money.
You brought up an important point about this convergence, because I describe it this way very intentionally because it's easier for somebody to think about like two paths converging to one and a consensus forming, and that it's a process, that it's not just all at once. There will certainly be an acceleration and rapid monetization at some point, in my view, soon. But that, and Saif Dean has a great quote. I include it in there.
Let me read it.
Let me see if I can find it. Do you have it?
I've got it. Having a single medium of exchange allows the size of the economy to grow as large as the number of people willing to use that medium of exchange. The larger the size of the economy, the larger the opportunities for gains from exchange and specialization. And perhaps more significantly, the longer and more sophisticated the structure of production can become.
Yeah, and so that's from the Bitcoin Standard, Saif Dean's book, which everyone should read. But it's this idea that that economies actually are formed through the common use of money. So if you think about it from the reverse, it's that everyone's converging on the form of money and then a price system emerges. But really what's happening is each next individual is choosing to use a form of money based on the properties that exist. And then the output of that is an economy. And, if I was to describe in like a non-academic way, it's just, a network of people that are trading with each other. But that in many ways, the economy has to be entirely rebuilt on a better form of money. Like it can't just port over. Okay, one trading partner and then the next and then the next and then the next and then basically the entire world's going to become repriced. Like value is going to be reset because of Bitcoin, because we've been living in this world of bad money or money that can be easily printed. So value quantified has been massively manipulated. Just using one example, like the value of a home, 90% of people can't afford a home. Like makes no sense in a functioning economy, one that is stable, unlike the dollar. And so that in this world, it's like the world actually, human beings converge on one form of money and the output is an economic system. And that if you start to think about it from like the individual decision point, and then maybe you running a business and you figured out Bitcoin and now you're trying to optimize around a cost structure of acquiring Bitcoin, that the economic system is a result of all people using one form of money and being able to trade. It doesn't mean that a second form of money can't exist. It just means that in practical application, the bad money gets run out by the good because everyone has the natural incentive to hold the good, and the economic structure actually forms because trade is actually enabled by the ability to have this form of money that multiple people are willing to accept. And as more and more do, then the economy becomes more sophisticated and can deliver value to more people. That quote from Saif really helped me hone in on to this. Like, it's not like a billion people going to one. It's like one by one actually choosing to use a single form of money for objective reasons. And then the output of that is an economic system.
Of which is a nice segue for you, Parker, to Shield Zaprite, which is being built as part of this new economic system, right?
Yeah. And, thinking about it is everything has to be rebuilt. Everything.
Yep.
That, you want, if somebody looks at Bitcoin and say, you say that it's the most easily transferable, lies. No, just the underlying mechanism is there. It is it's the easiest possible way to transfer the most scarce form of money that exists in the world. And the payment tools need to catch up. Can't just pop Bitcoin in the existing system because the rails work differently. So you got to build all the utility and the tools around the thing of fundamental value, which is Bitcoin's fixed supply and the mechanism by which it can be transferred. So now I'm working on Bitcoin payments and helping people understand both the importance of why they should care about it, why the rail is important, and then ultimately provide them a tool to, if they want to be able to accept Bitcoin as payment for their business, or as an individual who might work as a contractor, a freelancer, issuing invoices. The core idea behind Zaprite is we never touch your money. We allow you to connect wallets. We meet you where you are. You can either connect a hardware wallet non-custodially, a non-custodial Lightning node, or if you're just getting started, but you've started to understand why Bitcoin stores value. And I do encourage people that if you do not yet understand why Bitcoin stores value, not only to support me, but to support yourself, get my book. We'll have a link to it, I'm sure. But first you have to cross the chasm of understanding why Bitcoin stores value for Bitcoin payments to really be relevant to you. But if you first understand why Bitcoin stores value, then Bitcoin payments become inevitable and very logical. As more people figure out why Bitcoin stores value, more demand is payments, more capital is attracted to be able to build better tools. So we're out there focusing on making the experience to receive Bitcoin payments seamless. We're really focused on a few different use cases of payments because, again, if everything has to be rebuilt, there's a lot of different types of transactions and a lot of different types of commerce. We're focused on individuals and businesses that issue invoices, typically, like, say, for monthly billings or end of contract, for a contract, as well as e-commerce and people who might be selling goods and services with payment links on a website. So those two typical type of businesses we will be expanding in the future, but first focus on the basics of understanding Bitcoin and why it stores value. And then if you get to that point, give me a call or find us on our website at zapbright.com.
Love it, mate. And use /Bitten and you'll save $40 on your first year subscription.
Exactly.
There you go. Right. If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give it to and why?
You asked. I feel like this is the third time you've asked me this.
Fourth, fifth, I don't know.
I wish I had a more original answer, but I'd probably still orange pill Michael Jordan.
Yep.
Yeah. The
GOAT
of goats in my book. Yeah.
It's going to happen. 100% is going to happen. Somebody must have been in his ear about it already.
Yeah.
I mean,
somebody's got to get him the book. Somebody's got to get him gradually and suddenly.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. He's just
what's he doing these days? Doesn't he own a NASCAR racing team or something?
I think so. I think he just sold the basketball team. He owned part of one of the NBA teams where he was a majority owner. Just sold. I think he loves to play golf. He likes to gamble, but responsibly, as he would say. So yeah, I mean, it was a big part of my childhood. The '90s Bulls. Even though I wasn't a Bulls fan, I was a Rockets fan. But he was the GOAT. Just like the ultimate competitor, the ultimate proof of work. If you could have an orange pill, it's not. I think originally when I said it, I might have said Jerome Powell, but life's too short.
You've definitely said Powell in the past.
Yeah, I think Powell was the first time, and then I swapped it, and every other time it's been Jordan.
Yeah.
So Mike, everyone wants to be like Mike. So.
Exactly. And all right, plebs, you know what to do. We need to get gradually then suddenly and the Bitcoin standard in Mike's hands. Figure out a way to do that, and he might be our boy.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, there's definitely will in the Bitcoin space. We all know that.
Yes, sir.
All right, brother. Well, thank you so much. We'll do another chapter in maybe a month or two, and we'll decide which one. If you've got any ideas, just let me know. And I'm hoping this is going to go a long way to sharpen the tools of already existing Bitcoiners and help those that are falling in the rabbit hole behind us and getting up to speed a lot quicker.
Are you going to Prague?
Yeah.
Tell everybody out there, let's get to Prague. I'll be there in just under a month. So I look forward to seeing you in person there. And if people are interested in the book, they can find it at thesafehouse.com. It's Saif Deen Ammous's website, author of the Bitcoin Standard. You can also get there by saifdeen.com. But check out the book. And would love to hear your thoughts after you read the book.
Will you be bringing some copies? Are you going to be selling copies at the conference?
Yeah, I'm working on coordinating that, trying to figure out how many to bring. Excellent.
Bring a lot.
Okay.
Perfect. Cheers, mate. Well, we'll see you there.
Sounds good.
Take care. Bye-bye.